Imagine you are a king. You rule a vast domain from the cold stone heart of your ancestral fortress. One night, while walking through the torchlit corridors, you see her, a spectral woman in white. Is she a guardian angel, a benevolent spirit tied to your bloodline, or is she a harbinger of your death? For the royals of medieval and early modern Europe, this was not a flight of fantasy. It was a terrifying reality, an omen that could change the fate of an empire. We're settling now into a world lit by candlelight and fire, a world where ancient whispering forests press in on mighty castle walls, and every shadow could hold a secret. It is a time of faith and fear, where the line between the natural and the supernatural was thin and often crossed. As we begin our journey into these haunting tales from a forgotten time, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. What time is it in your particular corner of the world? Let me know in the comments below. It is always a profound wonder to see just how far these old stories can travel. Now, get comfortable, settle in, and if you enjoy our travels into the past, a simple like helps our community of history lovers to grow. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories are crafted to help you unwind, relax, and gently fall asleep. Tonight, in a special episode of Bedtime History, we explore the legends that haunted the medieval mind, the tales whispered in royal courts and peasant villages alike. Our first story takes us to the very heart of Germany, to a formidable fortress perched on a lonely mountaintop. It is a place that was home to a powerful dynasty and to its resident ghost, a specter of immense power and sorrow, known only as the White Lady. To understand this legend, we must first travel to the place of its birth. We must go to Swabia, a land of dense, dark forests and rolling hills in what is now southwestern Germany. Here, rising like a storybook illustration from the surrounding landscape, is a solitary peak. This is Mount Hohenzollern, and upon its summit, piercing the clouds, sits the castle that bears the same name, Hohenzollern Castle. It is more than a fortress. It is a statement, a symbol of power and lineage carved into the very stone of the mountain. The air here is different. It is thin and crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the forests far below. A biting wind often whistles around the castle's many battlements and turrets, a constant, lonely sound that has echoed here for centuries. This wind seems to carry the whispers of the past. From this high vantage point, the world unfolds like a map. You can see for miles in every direction, a patchwork of fields and woods that made this location so militarily crucial. In its day, it was called the crown of all castles in Swabia, and it is easy to see why. No army could approach unseen. No enemy could lay siege without a monumental effort. It was a seat of power designed to be unassailable. The castle you see today is not the original. It is the third incarnation to stand upon this mountain. The first fortress was erected in the early 11th century, a rugged and formidable medieval stronghold. Its origins are lost to the mists of time, a testament to the ancient roots of the family that built it. This first castle stood for 400 years before it was completely destroyed in 1423, the victim of a long and bitter siege. But the mountain remained, and the family endured. The family was the House of Hohenzollern. From this mountain seat, this Stamberg, or ancestral castle, they began their incredible ascent. They were a local, noble family, ambitious and politically astute. Through clever marriages, strategic alliances, and sheer force of will, they expanded their influence far beyond the hills of Swabia. They became electors of Brandenburg, a position that gave them a vote in the election of the Holy Roman Emperor himself. They became kings of Prussia, forging a military state renown throughout Europe. And eventually, in the 19th century, they would become the German emperors, unifying a nation under their eagle banner. A key figure in this rise was Frederick I. In the year 1415, he managed to acquire the electorate of Brandenburg, a pivotal moment that consolidated the family's power and set them on the path to greatness. This was the political climate of the late Middle Ages, a time of immense change and opportunity for those bold enough to seize it. The old feudal order was shifting, and powerful families like the Hohenzollerns were creating new centers of gravity in the fragmented landscape of the Holy Roman Empire. Imagine life within the walls of that second, 15th century castle, built upon the ruins of the first. This was the fortress where the legend of the White Lady began to truly solidify. Life was a constant state of readiness. The castellan, the man in charge of the castle's daily operations, would oversee everything. He ensured the guards were at their posts along the ramparts, their eyes scanning the horizon. He managed the stockpiles of food and water, the armories filled with swords and crossbows, and the stables that housed the knights' powerful war horses. Within these walls, the air would be thick with the smell of wood smoke. Countless hearths would be burning day and night, providing warmth against the mountain chill and cooking meals for the hundreds of inhabitants. The sound of a blacksmith's hammer would ring out from a forge. The shouts of men-at-arms training in the courtyard would echo off the stone. And deep within the castle's heart, in the great count's hall, with its high timbered ceilings and walls hung with tapestries, the lord and his family would hold court. It is in these more private spaces, the royal chambers and winding corridors, where our story truly takes root. Picture a heavy, creaking oak door opening into a darkened chamber. The only light comes from a flickering candle, casting long, dancing shadows. The floor is made of ancient, uneven stone, cold underfoot, and every footstep echoes in the profound silence. The walls are rough-hewn stone, cool and damp to the touch. It is in rooms like this, late at night, that the members of the great house of Hohenzollern would report seeing her, a silent, sorrowful figure, robed in white, who brought with her a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She was a secret kept within the family, a dark inheritance passed down from one generation to the next. While the current castle is a magnificent 19th century Gothic revival reconstruction, a romantic dream of the Middle Ages, it stands on the same foundations. It occupies the same sacred space. It became a powerful symbol of Prussian and later German national identity, a pilgrimage site for those who revered the long and storied history of the Hohenzollern dynasty. But beneath the romantic spires and grand halls lies the memory of a much darker, more intimate story. It is the story of a family curse. The question that echoed through the stone halls for 500 years was not if she would appear, but when. And, more importantly, who was she? To find the answer, we must delve into the most enduring origin story of the White Lady, a tale of love, ambition, and a horrific mistake. It is the tragic and cursed tale of Countess Kunigunde of Orlamund. Her story begins in the 14th century, a full century before the legend of the White Lady was first written down. Countess Kunigunde was a noblewoman of considerable standing, a widow with 2 young children. She was said to be beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely ambitious. In the complex web of medieval power dynamics, a strategic marriage was the surest path to greater influence, and Kunigunde set her sights on a man from the ascending house of Hohenzollern. His name was Albrecht, a man known to history as Albrecht the Fair. He was a burgrave of Nuremberg, a handsome and powerful figure. The Countess fell deeply in love with him, or perhaps with the future he represented. The legend tells us that she pursued him, making her intentions clear. Albrecht, for his part, was intrigued, but there were obstacles. Marriage negotiations between noble houses were never simple matters. They were complex transactions of land, titles, and political favor. According to the tale, Albrecht sent a message to the Countess. He told her that he would gladly marry her, were it not for 4 eyes standing in the way. 4 eyes, a simple, ambiguous phrase. What did he mean? In all likelihood, Albrecht was referring to his own parents. The Count and Countess of Hohenzollern would have had the final say in their son's choice of bride, and perhaps they did not approve of the match. They may have had another, more advantageous alliance in mind for him. This was the world of medieval nobility, but Kunigunde, consumed by her ambition and her passion, heard his words differently. She interpreted them in the most horrifying way imaginable. She believed the 4 eyes Albrecht spoke of belonged to her own 2 children, 2 small obstacles, the innocent, breathing reminders of her previous marriage. In her twisted and desperate logic, she convinced herself that if they were gone, the path to Albrecht and a new life would be clear. The legend paints a chilling scene. We see the Countess moving through the cold stone corridors of her castle, the silk of her gown rustling softly in the silence. She enters the nursery, a grand room with a large, canopied bed where her children are sleeping peacefully. They are bathed in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through a high, arched window. For a moment, she must have hesitated, but her ambition was stronger than her love. The stories claim she used a long, sharp hairpin made of gold or steel, a small, innocuous object transformed into a tool of unspeakable horror. The silence that fell over the room after the deed was done was a profound and chilling one. It was the silence of a soul utterly and irrevocably damned. When word of the children's sudden death reached Albrecht the Fair, he was not pleased, he was horrified. He understood immediately what she had done, what terrible crime she had committed in his name. He rejected her instantly and completely, severing all ties. Kunigunde's monstrous act had not secured her a crown, it had secured her eternal infamy. Overcome with guilt and abandoned by the man for whom she had sacrificed everything, the Countess sought a path to atonement. In the medieval world, for a sin so grievous, there was only one recourse, a pilgrimage. She cast off her fine silks and donned the rough woolen cloak of a pilgrim. She set out on the long, arduous journey to Rome, the center of the Christian world, to seek absolution from the Pope himself. The journey would have been perilous, a penance in its own right, fraught with bandits, disease, and the unforgiving elements. Upon her return, she used what remained of her fortune to found the Hohenzollern Abbey, a convent where she lived out the rest of her days as the abbess. She devoted her life to prayer and penitence, surrounded by the scent of incense and melting wax in the cold convent chapel. But some sins, the legend insists, are too great for even a lifetime of prayer to wash away. Upon her death, her spirit was not granted peace. Instead, it was cursed. Her eternal punishment was to be bound to the family she had so desperately tried to join. Her ghost was condemned to wander the halls of Hohenzollern castles, a spectre dressed in the white robes of a penitent nun. She became the Visfrau, the White Lady. Her appearance was not random. It became an omen, a dreadful prophecy. When she was seen gliding through the corridors of Bayreuth, Ansbach, or the great Berlin city palace, it meant that a death in the house of Hohenzollern was imminent. It was a penance that would last for centuries, her ghostly presence a perpetual reminder of her terrible crime. This story, however, is not the only one. Legends are fluid things, and the tale of the White Lady is a powerful archetype in German folklore. In another version, her identity is that of Bertha von Rosenberg, a 15th-century Bohemian noblewoman from the castle of Neuhaus. She was trapped in an unhappy marriage and was said to have been cursed by her husband's family to haunt their castles forever. The fact that the Hohenzollern family legend could absorb this other tale shows how adaptable and potent the Visfrau archetype was. She was a figure of sorrow and warning, a spirit bound to the fate of a noble house, embodying the dark secrets that often lay beneath a dynasty's glittering facade. The story of Kunigunde resonated so strongly because it touched upon deep-seated medieval fears. Infanticide was considered a truly heinous crime, a perversion of the natural order that was thought to bring a unique form of damnation. Her tale was a dark morality play about the dangers of unchecked female ambition and the terrible consequences of misinterpreting the will of powerful men. Now that we understand the tragedy of her supposed origin, we can turn to the historical record, to the documented accounts of her appearances, and the very real terror she inspired in the great rulers of Prussia. Her ominous duty began in earnest during the late 15th century. The first widely recorded sighting is often cited as having occurred in the year 1486 at a Hohenzollern Castle in Bayreuth. Chroniclers of the time wrote that she appeared gliding silently through the halls just days before the death of one of the Hohenzollern princes. The warning had been delivered, the pattern had been set. From that point on, she became an accepted, if dreaded, part of life and death at the highest levels of the dynasty. Her favored haunting ground became the Berlin city palace, the sprawling primary residence of the Hohenzollern electors, and, later, the powerful kings of Prussia. For centuries, the servants, guards, and blue-blooded family members themselves would whisper stories of her appearances. A sudden, inexplicable cold spot in a lavishly decorated room, a lone, ghostly sigh echoing in a silent corridor, the faint, cloying scent of funeral lilies that would manifest in a room with no flowers. The sightings became so commonplace that a sort of protocol developed around them, a set of rules to her supernatural appearances. One of the most famous accounts involves the Elector Joachim II in the mid-16th century. Upon being told by his terrified courtiers that the White Lady had been seen walking the halls, the Elector remained remarkably calm. He famously remarked, "It is not for me yet." According to the lore, the White Lady would appear with her face covered by a white veil for most members of the family. But for the head of the house, the ruling elector, or king himself, she would appear with a black veil. It was a subtle but terrifying distinction. Her reputation as an infallible prophet of doom was cemented in the year 1619. A well-documented series of appearances preceded the death of Johann Sigismund, the Elector of Brandenburg. The court was thrown into a state of tense anxiety. The sight of her, a silent, white figure drifting through the palace, would cause the faces of hardened courtiers to turn pale with fear. The tense silence around the royal dinner table after a reported sighting must have been unbearable. She was more than a ghost. She was a walking death warrant. Not every ruler took her appearances with such stoicism. King Frederick William I, the famously stern and pragmatic soldier king of 18th century Prussia, was a man who believed in discipline, order, and firepower. He had little time for superstition. One night, the legend says, he came face to face with the White Lady in a corridor of the Berlin Palace. Rather than recoil in fear, the king reacted as a soldier would. He drew his pistol, aimed it at the shimmering apparition, and fired. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. But the bullet passed harmlessly through her form, and she vanished, unfazed. Even the iron will of the soldier king was no match for the family curse. Perhaps her most significant absence only served to deepen the mystery. During the long and celebrated reign of Frederick the Great, King Frederick William's son, the White Lady was reportedly never seen. Frederick was a man of the Enlightenment. He was a skeptical philosopher and a rationalist who publicly scoffed at the idea of ghosts and supernatural omens. It was as if the spirit, knowing she would not be believed, simply chose not to appear. The moment he died in 1786 at his beloved palace of Sanssouci, however, she returned. A notable sighting was reported just before his death, reaffirming her connection to the dynasty's fate. The psychological impact of this belief cannot be overstated. Imagine trying to govern a kingdom, to make decisions of war and peace, all while believing that a spectral ancestor could appear at any moment to announce your impending demise. It added a layer of fatalistic dread to the already immense pressures of rule. The legend also spread as the Hohenzollerns intermarried with other great European houses. The story of their ghostly harbinger traveled with them. Soon, other royal families, including the mighty Habsburgs of Austria, began reporting sightings of their own White Lady, a testament to the legend's power. These were not just peasant superstitions. These sightings were often recorded in official or semi-official court chronicles and histories, lending them a veneer of credibility. The White Lady was treated as a fact of life, a dynastic guardian of sorts, whose role was to warn the family of a coming death, of the end of a line. Her last major sighting is perhaps the most poignant. Court officials reported seeing her in the Berlin City Palace shortly before 1918. It was a final, sorrowful warning. It did not precede the death of a single monarch, but something far greater, the death of the German monarchy itself, which would fall at the end of the First World War. The White Lady remains a powerful symbol of how the supernatural was woven into the very fate of dynasties, a ghostly confidant to kings and queens. Do you think those powerful rulers truly believed in her, or was she simply a convenient story, a piece of courtly folklore? Share your thoughts as we journey onward. The spirit of the Countess haunted the gilded and tapestried corridors of power, but other spirits, born of more violent ends, preferred more desolate, war-torn landscapes. Our next story takes us from the regal heart of the German court to a bloody English battlefield, and to a fortress stained with the memory of treason and death. We leave the world of omens and whispers, and enter a realm of steel, stone, and vengeance. We travel now to West Yorkshire, in the north of England. Here, in the town of Pontefract, stand the ruins of a once mighty castle. This is not a place of romance like Hohenzollern. This is a grim, brooding fortress, a prison, an execution site. Its history is not written in royal decrees, but in blood and betrayal. It was the perfect, cursed ground to breed a vengeful ghost. The story of Pontefract Castle begins with conquest. Shortly after the Norman invasion of 1066, William the Conqueror granted the lands here to one of his loyal barons, Ilbert de Lacy. Around the year 1070, de Lacy began construction of a formidable wooden fortress, which was later rebuilt in stone. It was built to dominate, to control. Its position on the Great North Road, the main artery connecting London to the north, was of immense strategic importance. It soon earned a fearsome nickname. It was called the Key to the North. He who held Pontefract held the north of England. But the castle's reputation would be built less on its military might and more on the darkness within its walls. It became infamous throughout the kingdom as a place where high-status prisoners were sent to disappear. Its formidable gatehouse, its towering keep, and its extensive curtain walls were not just designed to keep armies out. They were designed to keep secrets in. To walk through its gates was to leave the world of the living behind. You can almost hear the metallic clang of a heavy portcullis dropping shut behind you, a sound of absolute finality. The dungeons of Pontefract were a place of unimaginable misery. Deep beneath the castle, carved into the rock, these chambers were cold, dark, and oppressive. The air was thick with the damp, musty smell of wet stone and human despair. The only light would have come from a narrow slit in the wall or the flickering torch of a jailer. Prisoners would have felt the rough, cold stone beneath their fingertips day after day. They would have seen the names and desperate prayers of previous inmates carved into the walls, ghostly messages from the dead. The taste of stale water, the foul smell of unwashed bodies in a crowded cell. This was the reality of life and death at Pontefract. It was in one such cell that a king met his end. In the year 1400, King Richard II, deposed and disgraced, was imprisoned within these walls. His fate remains a mystery, shrouded in rumor. Some chronicles say he was starved to death, a slow and agonizing end in the suffocating darkness. Others whisper that he was violently murdered by his keepers. Whatever the truth, his death cemented Pontefract's reputation as a royal tomb. He was not the last. The castle's guest list reads like a who's who of medieval nobility, fallen on hard times. Charles, the duke of one of the great poets of his age, was held here for a time after his capture at the Battle of Agincourt. So too was King James I of Scotland, before he was finally ransomed. During the brutal civil war known as the Wars of the Roses, Pontefract was a key stronghold for the Lancastrian cause, a bastion of their power in the north. The castle's bloody ledger continued to grow. In 1483, as Richard III made his ruthless play for the throne, he had two key rivals brought to Pontefract. They were Anthony Woodville, the second Earl Rivers, and Richard Grey. They were the uncle and the half-brother to the boy king, Edward V, one of the tragic princes in the Tower. They were brought to Pontefract and on Richard's orders summarily executed. The castle had once again served its grim purpose as a place of political extermination. Centuries later, during the English Civil War of the 1640s, Pontefract found its last moment of grim glory. It was a staunch royalist bastion, a symbol of loyalty to the doomed King Charles I. The castle endured 3 separate, brutal sieges by parliamentary forces. Its defenders held out with incredible tenacity, becoming the very last royalist fortress in the entire country to finally surrender. Their defiance, however, sealed the castle's fate. After the war, in 1649, a weary parliament ordered the castle to be slighted. This was a deliberate, systematic demolition. Its great walls were pulled down, its towers filled with gunpowder and blown apart, ensuring that it could never again be used as a fortress of rebellion. The chilling sound of wind whistling through these now shattered ruins is all that remains of its former power. But the memories and the ghosts linger. From this grim and violent history, we now focus on one of its most famous victims, a powerful earl whose unjust death would give birth to a legend of a restless, armored spirit. His name was Thomas, the second Earl of Lancaster. He was a man born to power as a cousin to the reigning monarch, King Edward II. Thomas was a prince of the royal blood. He was also, through inheritance and a strategic marriage, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in all of England. His vast estates stretched across the country, but his favorite seat of power, his great northern stronghold, was Pontefract Castle. Thomas was a proud and often difficult man. He found himself at the head of a powerful group of barons who were deeply dissatisfied with the king's rule. The particular focus of their anger was a man named Piers Gaveston, the king's favorite. Gaveston was seen by many as an arrogant upstart who held an unhealthy influence over the king, and Thomas of Lancaster became his most implacable enemy. He led the baronial opposition, a movement aimed at reining in the king's power and expelling his favorites from court. This political struggle came to a head with the ordinances of 1311. Thomas was a key figure behind these reforms, a series of regulations forced upon the king that were designed to give the barons more oversight in the governance of the realm. It was a direct challenge to royal authority. The situation escalated dramatically the following year. In 1312, Thomas took matters into his own hands. He orchestrated the capture of Piers Gaveston, and after a sham trial, had him executed. This act earned him the king's undying, burning hatred. It was a personal insult that Edward would never forgive. For the next decade, England was trapped in a cold war between the king and his powerful cousin. Their rivalry paralyzed the kingdom. Finally, in 1322, the conflict erupted into open warfare. At the Battle of Boroughbridge, Thomas of Lancaster's rebel army was decisively defeated by royalist forces. The sounds of clashing steel and the desperate war cries of dying men marked the end of his rebellion. He was captured, a great lord brought low, the royal standard of his cousin fluttering victoriously in the wind. What followed was the ultimate humiliation. Thomas was bound in heavy iron chains, his wrists and ankles shackled. He was then transported not to London for a proper trial, but to his own home, to Pontefract. The king himself, along with his new favorites, the Despencer family, presided over a show trial in the great hall of Lancaster's own castle. He was charged with treason, but he was not allowed to speak a single word in his own defense. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. He was condemned to die as a traitor. On the 22nd of March, 1322, Thomas was led from his dungeon. He was placed on a lowly pack horse and paraded through a jeering, hostile crowd. They took him to a small hill just outside the castle walls, a place that is still known today as St. Thomas's Hill. There, in the pale March sunlight, he was forced to kneel. As a final, calculated insult, he was made to face north, towards Scotland, the country he had been accused of conspiring with. The last thing he saw would have been the glint of the executioner's axe. The last thing he smelled would have been the damp earth, and, soon, his own blood. But the story did not end there. In the eyes of the common people who had suffered under Edward II's misrule, Thomas of Lancaster was no traitor. He was a hero. He was a martyr who had stood up to a tyrannical king. Soon, miracles were reported at his tomb in the local priory. An unofficial cult sprang up around him, and he was venerated as a saint. His story became a powerful symbol of resistance. This popular support and the king's brutal revenge against Lancaster's followers ultimately contributed to Edward's own downfall. Just 5 years later, the king himself would be deposed and brutally murdered. As a great and wealthy earl, a prince of the blood, Thomas would have possessed magnificent suits of plate armor, gleaming, articulated steel, crafted by masters. Armor was the ultimate symbol of a knight's power and status. It was the very skin of his martial identity. And it is this armor, this symbol of his betrayed power, that is said to have remained behind, unable to rest. For a man so powerful, so proud, to be betrayed and executed at his own home was an injustice so profound that it stained the very land. It is from this deep well of resentment that the legend of a vengeful, armored ghost would rise. Soon after the earl's execution, the stories began. They were not tales told in the royal court or recorded by learned monks. They were soldiers' tales. They were whispers shared by locals in taverns and by sentries keeping watch on the castle walls during the long, dark nights. They spoke of seeing a figure, a lone knight, clad from head to foot in a suit of black plate armor. He was most often seen in the fields surrounding Pontefract Castle, the very grounds where battles had been fought and where the earl himself had met his end. Sometimes he was on foot, a silent, menacing silhouette moving through the mist. Other times he was seen on horseback, a spectral rider on a spectral steed, galloping silently across the moonlit landscape. You might hear the sound of a horse's hooves on the soft turf, but see no horse. Or you might hear the faint, metallic, scraping sound of armor moving in the distance, a sound that would send a chill down any soldier's spine. The armor itself was significant. While knights wore polished steel armor, truly black armor was rare and carried a powerful symbolism. It was difficult to produce and maintain, often reserved for ceremonial purposes, or, more pointedly, to project a terrifying and anonymous image on the battlefield. It was the color of mourning, of night, and of death. For the ghost of the betrayed earl to appear in black was a clear statement. He was not a saintly martyr in shining silver. He was a harbinger of doom, a figure of pure vengeance. This martial apparition of the Black Knight is a distinct legend, though it sometimes gets conflated with the more famous haunting at Pontefract, that of the Black Monk, a violent poltergeist case from a much later period. The knight is different. He is not a noisy, destructive spirit. He is a silent, sorrowful, and deeply menacing presence, forever tied to the site of his betrayal. Medieval belief provided fertile ground for such a story to grow. It was commonly held that sites of great violence, battlefields, execution grounds, were prone to hauntings. The souls of those who died suddenly and violently, it was thought, could not rest. They were trapped, forced to endlessly wander the place of their demise. The eerie silence that falls over a battlefield after the fighting has stopped was seen as a silence filled with unseen presences. Anyone walking those fields at night would have felt it. A profound sense of being watched from the dark woods bordering the field. A sudden, unnatural drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the weather. The figure of the ghostly knight also taps into a powerful European folklore motif known as the Wild Hunt. This was the legend of a spectral huntsman, often a damned nobleman or a pagan god, leading a procession of ghostly riders and hounds across the night sky. The Black Knight of Pontefract can be seen as a solitary, more personal version of this myth. He is not hunting for souls in general. He is hunting for the justice he was denied in life. This grim reputation, reinforced by the ghost story, became part of the castle's very identity. It was a feared place. This psychological warfare was, in its own way, as effective as its stone walls and high towers. The legend was passed down through oral tradition, a ghost story that became part of the local character, and at its heart was the idea of a cursed object. The narrative suggests that the spirit of Thomas of Lancaster became attached to one of his suits of armor, left behind in the castle armory. Perhaps the armor itself was seen to move on its own. Perhaps it was simply the vessel his angry spirit chose to inhabit. The legend gained a new lease on life over 300 years later, during the brutal sieges of the English Civil War. Royalist soldiers, trapped within the castle walls and fighting for their own doomed king, claimed to see the Black Knight as a comrade in arms. They saw him as a ghostly omen of their own defiance against a rebellious parliament. A sentry, walking the cold battlements on a winter's night, might see a flicker of movement in the fields below. He would see the moonlight glinting off polished black steel, and he would not feel fear, but a strange sense of kinship with the ancient, betrayed lord of the castle. Medieval theology had a complex and often contradictory view of ghosts. Some were believed to be souls from purgatory, returning to ask the living for prayers to shorten their penance. But others, like the Black Knight, seemed to be something else entirely. They were not asking for prayers. They were demanding vengeance. The story of Thomas of Lancaster emphasizes that because he was tried as a traitor, denied a proper burial befitting his station, and because his cause was ultimately lost, his powerful spirit could simply never be at peace. He was condemned to haunt the fields of his own domain, a permanent, armored scar upon the landscape. The Black Knight is a legend born of betrayal and brutal warfare, a spirit forged in the heat of battle and the cold injustice of a traitor's death. Which do you find more frightening? A ghostly, sorrowful omen in a royal palace, or a silent, spectral warrior still seeking vengeance on a lonely battlefield? Let me know your thoughts. From a vengeful ghost of war, a spirit bound by anger and a thirst for justice, we move now to our final story. We journey to a place where the spirits are not of individuals seeking retribution, but of an entire community bound together in death and in faith. We travel to a place of myth and memory, of sacred peace and unspeakable violence. Our journey takes us south, to the green, rolling hills of Somerset, and to the skeletal ruins of what was once the most holy place in England, Glastonbury Abbey. Our story begins not with a castle, but with an island, or what once looked like an island. The town of Glastonbury is dominated by a strange, conical hill that rises dramatically from the surrounding flat landscape. This is Glastonbury Tor for thousands of years. The lands around it, the Somerset Levels, were a watery marsh, often flooding in the winter. In those ancient times, the Tor would have risen from the mists and waters like a true island, an island of mystery. This place, many came to believe, was the mythical Isle of Avalon, the final resting place of the legendary King Arthur. Glastonbury Abbey, which rests at the foot of the Tor, is steeped in a history that is almost inseparable from myth. According to a legend of incredible power and persistence, it was the site of the very first Christian church in all of Britain. The story claims it was founded in the 1st century AD by Joseph of Arimathea, the man who, according to the Gospels, buried the body of Jesus after the crucifixion. The legend says that Joseph traveled from the Holy Land, carrying with him the Holy Grail, and came to rest on this sacred island. Upon his arrival, he climbed a nearby hill, since named Wearial Hill. Exhausted from his long journey, he thrust his staff into the ground. The staff, cut from a hawthorn tree in the Holy Land, miraculously took root. It grew into a tree, the Glastonbury thorn, which had the unique property of blooming twice a year, once in the spring and once at Christmas. For centuries, this tree was seen as a living miracle, a direct link to the dawn of Christianity. This foundational myth gave Glastonbury an almost unparalleled spiritual authority. But another legend would make it famous. In the year 1191, the monks of the abbey made a spectacular announcement. They claimed to have discovered, buried deep in their cemetery, the remains of King Arthur and his queen, Guinevere. They unearthed a massive coffin made from a hollowed-out log, and within it the skeletons of a tall man and a woman. A lead cross found with them was said to bear the inscription, "Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur, with Guinevere, his second wife, in the Isle of Avalon." This discovery was, to put it mildly, convenient. Just 7 years earlier, in 1184, a devastating fire had swept through the abbey, destroying most of its ancient and holy buildings. The monks needed money to rebuild, and what better way to attract wealthy pilgrims than to offer them the chance to visit the tomb of a national hero? The discovery of Arthur's grave turned Glastonbury into one of the most important pilgrimage sites in all of Christendom. While its legendary origins are fantastical, the historical record is impressive enough. A monastery of some kind existed at Glastonbury by the 7th century. In the 10th century, it was greatly enlarged and reformed by the influential Saint Dunstan, who became its abbot and later the Archbishop of Canterbury. Under his guidance, it became a great center of learning and piety. By the 14th century, it was stagnatorily wealthy and powerful, its influence in England second only to the great abbey at Westminster. Imagine the abbey in its prime, in the early 16th century. It was a vast and magnificent complex. The main church was a colossal structure, its soaring arches reaching towards heaven, its interior filled with the scent of beeswax candles, old parchment, and the sweet, lingering smell of incense. Sunlight would have filtered through magnificent stained glass windows, painting the stone floors in vibrant jewels of color. Outside, the cloister garden would have been a place of profound peace and order, a green oasis for contemplation. Life for the Benedictine monks who lived here was one of serene and structured devotion. Their days were governed by the rhythm of bells, calling them to prayer 7 times a day. Their life was a balance of prayer, work, and study, encapsulated in the Benedictine motto, Ora et labora, pray and work. In the scriptorium, you would have heard the soft, rhythmic scratching of quills on vellum as monks painstakingly copied and illuminated manuscripts. Glastonbury's library was one of the greatest in Europe, a treasure house of ancient knowledge, philosophy, and theology. The entire atmosphere was one of deep, abiding peace. It was a world unto itself, a spiritual fortress dedicated to 1,000 years of prayer. From the top of the Tor, on a misty morning, a monk could look out over the watery levels and feel utterly removed from the turbulent world of politics and kings. But this idyllic and sacred peace was not to last. The winds of a violent political and religious change were blowing from London, and they were about to bring utter ruin to this ancient sanctuary. The storm that destroyed Glastonbury Abbey had a name: King Henry VIII. By the 1530s, Henry was desperate for a male heir, and his wife, Catherine of Aragon, had failed to provide one. His desire to annul his marriage and wed Anne Boleyn led him to a catastrophic break with the Catholic Church in Rome. The Act of Supremacy in 1534 declared Henry the supreme head of the Church of England. This momentous act gave him not only spiritual authority, but also control over the vast wealth of the English monasteries. Between 1536 and 1541, Henry enacted a policy that would change the face of England forever: the dissolution of the monasteries. His commissioners, ruthless men like Thomas Cromwell, were sent across the country to systematically disband monastic communities, seizing their lands, their gold, and their holy treasures for the crown. It was an act of cultural vandalism on an industrial scale. At the head of Glastonbury Abbey during this perilous time was a man named Richard Whiting. He had been the abbot since 1525 and was widely respected as a pious, scholarly, and kind-hearted leader. He was an old man trying to steer his ancient institution through a hurricane. At first, Whiting tried to comply with the new reality. He signed the Act of Supremacy, hoping that by acknowledging the king's authority, he could save his beloved abbey. For a time, it seemed to work. Glastonbury, because of its immense prestige, was among the last to be targeted. But the king's greed was insatiable. In 1539, the commissioners arrived at Glastonbury, determined to find a reason to dissolve it. They searched the abbey for hidden treasures, for any evidence of loyalty to the Pope, for any sign of resistance. Abbot Whiting, steadfast in his faith, refused to simply sign away 1,000 years of history. He resisted the final, total surrender of the abbey. This act of defiance was all the excuse the king's men needed. They arrested the elderly abbot, accusing him of hiding church treasures from the king. Under the new laws, this was an act of treason. Whiting was taken to the bishop's palace in the nearby town of Wells for a show trial. He was not allowed to speak in his own defense. The outcome was never in doubt. He was found guilty. The sentence was death, the most gruesome death reserved for traitors. On the 15th of November, 1539, Richard Whiting, along with 2 of his monks, was tied to a hurtla, wooden frame-end, dragged by horses from Wells back to Glastonbury. They dragged him through the town and up the steep slope of Glastonbury Tor, the sacred hill that overlooked his own abbey. The cold November wind must have been merciless. At the summit, in full view of his home, the old man was hanged, but cut down while still alive. He was then subjected to the rest of the horrific sentence. He was drawn and quartered. His head was cut off and placed on a spike above the main gate of the abbey he had died to protect. His severed limbs were sent to the towns of Bath, Wells, Ilchester, and Bridgewater, a grisly warning to any others who might dare to defy the king. The moment their abbot was dead, the king's men fell upon the abbey like wolves. The terrified silence of the remaining monks was broken by the sound of hammers smashing priceless, centuries-old stained glass, the sound of axes splintering ancient oak. They stripped the lead from the roofs, melting it down for the king's coffers. They plundered the treasury, taking golden candlesticks and silver chalices. The great library was decimated. Priceless, Irreplaceable books were torn apart for their bindings, their illuminated pages left to rot or used to light fires, the air filled with the smell of smoke from burning books and sacred vestments. The surviving monks were cast out, given a tiny pension, and forbidden from living their monastic lives. A community that had preyed on this spot for a millennium was shattered in a matter of days. The magnificent abbey, once the jewel of England, was left as an empty shell. Its stones were quarried by locals for their own buildings. It was left to decay, to become the haunting skeletal ruin we see today. An act of such profound violence against a holy place and its holy men left a scar not just on the landscape, but on the spiritual plane itself. It is, said the monks, in a way never truly left. The violence ended. The king's men left. The great abbey was left to the wind and the rain. But something remained behind. A spiritual echo, a memory imprinted on the very stones of the place. Soon the stories began. People visiting the now desolate ruins, especially in the quiet hours of dusk or dawn, reported strange and inexplicable things. The most common report, the one that endures to this day, is a sound. It is the faint, ethereal sound of a choir of Latin plainsong carried on the evening breeze. Visitors standing in the footprint of the great church, on the soft grass where the main aisle once lay, have heard it, a multi-layered chant, seemingly coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It is the sound of the monks, it is said, continuing their sacred duties, their opus Dei, long after their bodies have turned to dust. Their voices, a ghostly residue of their devotion, still rise in prayer. Sometimes the apparitions are visual. People have claimed to see dark, cowled figures moving silently through the crumbling stone archways. They are seen walking the path of the old cloister, or kneeling near the site of the high altar, their forms momentarily visible before vanishing into the twilight. These figures are rarely menacing. They seem oblivious to the modern world, lost in a routine of prayer that even death could not break. Some legends are more specific. The ghost of the martyred Richard Whiting is said to still watch over his ruined home. He is sometimes seen in the abbot's kitchen, one of the only buildings to survive the destruction relatively intact. Other stories place his anguished spirit on the tour, endlessly reenacting his final, agonizing journey up the hill. A tortured soul forever bound to the place of his execution. Alongside the sights and sounds are other sensations. People have reported the distinct smell of incense wafting through the ruins, or the distant, echoing toll of an unseen bell. Many visitors, even those who know nothing of the abbey's history, report feeling an overwhelming sense of profound sadness in certain areas, or, conversely, a feeling of deep and abiding peace. Unlike the intelligent, omen-bearing spirit of the White Lady, the phantom monks are often described as a classic example of a residual haunting. The theory suggests that powerful or traumatic events or routines repeated over and over for centuries can imprint themselves on a location like a spiritual recording. The ghostly monks are not aware of the people who see them. They are simply an echo, a fragment of time replaying itself, their devotion so strong that it transcends their own destruction. This belief was fueled in later centuries. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries developed a deep fascination with ruins. Places like Glastonbury became tourist destinations, and ghost stories flourished as a way for people to connect with their tragic, epic past. The last rays of the setting sun illuminating the ruined arches, making them look like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky, provide the perfect backdrop for a melancholic tale. These are not just old stories. Sightings and experiences continue to be reported by modern tourists, by locals who have lived near the abbey their whole lives, and by paranormal investigators drawn to the site's powerful energy. For English Catholics, during the centuries of persecution that followed the Reformation, the ruins became a secret place of pilgrimage, a memorial to martyrs like Richard Whiting. The stories of the phantom monks were a comfort, a sign that their faith had not been extinguished. Today, Glastonbury is a unique center for various spiritual beliefs, from Christianity to neo-paganism and New Age practices. Many who visit feel a powerful spiritual energy here, an energy they attribute to its long and complex history, from Avalon to the Abbey. Perhaps, in the end, the legend of the phantom monks is the folk memory of a community's collective trauma. It is a way of processing the violent, shocking end of a way of life that had lasted for over 1,000 years. Or perhaps, on a quiet evening, when the wind blows just right through the broken arches of that ruined church, it really does sound a little like chanting. And in the profound, overwhelming silence of the site at night, a silence that seems full of unheard prayers, it is easy to believe that the faith of those long-dead monks was strong enough to persist an eternal echo in the place they called home. The White Lady, the Black Knight, and the Phantom Monks. Each is a product of a unique and powerful fear. The fear of dynastic failure and the end of a bloodline. The fear of a violent, unjust death and a name forever dishonored. And the fear of a sacred way of life being utterly and brutally erased. These were not just stories to frighten children by the fireside. They were the echoes of real history, a way for people to make sense of a world filled with immense tragedy, ruthless ambition, and unwavering faith. They are the whispers from a past that, in the quietest moments, if we listen very carefully, we can still hear. As our main story concludes for tonight, I hope you found this journey into the past both interesting and relaxing. If you're still awake and with me, thank you for listening. There is always more history to explore if you'd like to stay. But for now, I wish you peace, comfort, and the very sweetest of dreams. As our journey through the haunted landscapes of medieval Europe continues, we now move from the specific to the universal. We have walked with the spectral lady of a royal court, stood vigil on a battlefield with an armored knight, and listened for the ghostly chants in a ruined abbey. But these stories, as powerful as they are like the visible peaks of a vast, submerged mountain. To truly understand them, we must now descend into the deep waters of the medieval mind itself. We must explore the world as they saw it, a world lit not by electricity and science, but by the steady, flickering glow of faith and fear. This final chapter is a calm reflection. It is an epilogue, a gentle exploration of the worldview that made these legends not just possible, but necessary. We will look at the framework of their reality, the social purpose of their ghosts, and the long, lingering echo their beliefs have left on our modern world. So settle in a little deeper, and let us travel one last time, not to a place, but to a way of seeing. To understand the medieval spirit world, we must first understand the medieval world itself. It was a place of profound and beautiful order, an order believed to have been designed by God Himself. This was not a universe of random chance, but a meticulously constructed hierarchy, a great cosmic tapestry in which every single thread had its place. This concept was often visualized as the great chain of being. Imagine a ladder, stretching from the mud and the dirt of the earth all the way to the highest point of heaven. At the very top was God. Below him were the archangels and the different choirs of angels. Then came humanity, and below humanity, the animal kingdom, itself ordered from noble lions down to lowly insects. Below the animals were the plants, from the mighty oak to the humble moss. And finally, at the very bottom, were the minerals and rocks. Everything in creation had its rank on this chain. A king was above a duke, who was above a knight, who was above a peasant. A lion was above a dog. Gold was above lead. This was the divine plan. It was a world view that provided structure, meaning, and a sense of profound stability. A ghost, then, was a terrifying disruption. It was a soul out of its proper place, a link that had broken from the chain. This earthly hierarchy was mirrored in the structure of society, which was often described as being made of three orders. There were those who prayed, the clergy, who were responsible for the spiritual well-being of all. There were those who fight, the nobility, who provided protection and justice. And there were those who work, the peasantry, who fed and sustained the other two orders. This was not seen as a system of inequality, but as a divinely ordained body, with each part working in harmony for the good of the whole. The spiritual and the earthly were reflections of one another, inextricably linked. Into this ordered world, the reality of death was a constant and intimate companion. Life was fragile. Mortality rates were incredibly high. A failed harvest could lead to famine. A small cut could lead to a fatal infection. And plagues could sweep through entire communities with terrifying speed. The smell of damp earth in a newly dug grave was a familiar one. Death was not hidden away in hospitals, as it often is today. It was a public event, a communal experience. This constant proximity to death meant that the afterlife was not an abstract concept. It was an urgent, constant preoccupation. What happened to the soul after the final breath was the single most important question of a person's existence. The Church provided the answer. It was the sole source of knowledge for most people, the great repository of wisdom that explained the universe, from the creation of the world to the final judgment. On the walls of the parish church, a peasant who could not read could see it all laid out in vivid, allegorical frescoes. The serene faces of the saints in heaven, the tormented bodies of the damned in hell, prodded by grotesque demons. These images were not metaphors. They were maps of the cosmos, a guide to eternity. And crucially, in the later Middle Ages, the Church taught of a third place, a place between the finality of heaven and hell. It was called purgatory. This was a realm where the souls of the reasonably good, those who died in a state of grace but still burdened by lesser sins, would go to be purified. They would suffer for a time, working off their spiritual debts, until they were clean enough to be admitted into the presence of God. This belief was of monumental importance for the history of ghosts. A ghost was no longer necessarily a demon in disguise, as early theologians had often taught. More often than not, it was a soul from purgatory, a loved one, a parent, a sibling, or a friend, returning to the world of the living not to harm, but to ask for help. They were asking for prayers, for masses to be said in their name, to shorten their time of suffering. A ghost story became an act of charity. The line between the physical and the spiritual was porous, almost non-existent. The world was charged with supernatural power. Holy relics, the bone of a saint, a splinter of the true cross, were not just symbols. They were believed to contain a tangible divine power that could heal the sick and protect a city. The sacraments of the Church, like baptism and the Eucharist, were physical acts that had a direct and profound effect on the eternal soul. The booming sound of a church bell, marking the hours of prayer, was a sound that literally pushed back the darkness, a sonic shield against demonic influence. Without the lens of modern science, the world was read in a different way. A strange noise in the night, the sudden death of livestock, a bout of illness. These things were not attributed to faulty plumbing or microbes. They were attributed to supernatural forces. The world was full of omens and portents. The sudden appearance of a comet was a divine message, usually foretelling the death of a king or a great war. A solar eclipse was not an astronomical event. It was a terrifying sign of God's anger, causing a collective gasp from the crowd, watching the sun disappear from the sky. The devil and his demons were believed to be a real and constant presence in the world, forever whispering temptations, spreading disease, and trying to drag souls down to perdition. But conversely, miracles were also expected. God, the Virgin Mary, and the saints were thought to intervene regularly in the affairs of humanity, healing the sick, protecting travelers, and answering prayers. Even the understanding of the human body was spiritual. Health was believed to depend on the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These fluids corresponded to the four elements of the universe and influenced a person's temperament. An imbalance of black bile, for example, could lead to melancholy. This system connected a person's physical health directly to their personality and their place in the cosmos. Time itself was not seen as a straight, linear progression towards the future. It was cyclical, marked by the turning of the agricultural seasons and the great festivals of the church calendar: Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, Pentecost. Life was a recurring pattern, a great wheel turning year after year. It was within this world, a world saturated with spiritual meaning, that the ghost story found its natural home. With this deeply spiritual worldview as our backdrop, we can now see that a medieval ghost story was never just a scary tale. It was a tool. It was a piece of social technology that performed vital functions for the community. These stories were not simply for entertainment around a crackling hearth fire. They were lessons, warnings, and a way of ordering the world. Perhaps the most important function of a ghost story was that of moral enforcement. In a world where the Church's teachings governed every aspect of life, ghosts often served as supernatural messengers, reinforcing Christian morality. Tales were common of sinful men, a greedy merchant, a violent knight, a gluttonous priestrit. Their spirits would appear to their friends or family, describing the punishments they were enduring in purgatory for their unconfessed sins. They would beg the living to change their ways, to go to confession, to give to the poor, to avoid the sins that had led to their own suffering. These stories, often preached from the pulpit by a traveling friar, were more effective than any sermon. They made the consequences of sin terrifyingly real. They were a constant reminder of death, a memento mori, urging people to live a good and pious life to ensure a peaceful afterlife. Their fingers anxiously tracing the beads of a worn wooden rosary. Ghost stories also served a crucial political function. Legends attached to powerful noble families, like the story of the White Lady of Hohenzollern, were a form of supernatural propaganda. The appearance of a dynastic ghost, an omen tied to the very bloodline of a ruling house, reinforced that family's legitimacy and importance. It suggested that their fate was so significant that the spirit world itself was forced to take notice. A family important enough to have its own personal harbinger of death was a family clearly chosen by destiny to rule. The coat of arms on their tapestry was not just a symbol of their lineage. It was a sign of a house with a foot in both this world and the next. For those who had been wronged by the powerful, a ghost story could be a form of posthumous justice. A man like Thomas of Lancaster, executed as a traitor by his king, could not receive justice in a royal court, but in the court of public opinion, his story could live on. The legend of his vengeful, armored ghost haunting the fields of Pontefract was a way for his memory to speak out from beyond the grave. It implicitly condemned the king who had wronged him and kept the story of his unjust death alive for generations. In a society where open dissent could be fatal, the ghost story was a powerful and surprisingly safe way to offer political criticism. These tales also provided a sense of order and explanation in a chaotic and often frightening world. When a sudden misfortune occurred, a child falling ill, a fire destroying a barnet, was deeply unsettling. Attributing the event to a supernatural cause, even a frightening one, could be strangely comforting. To say that a ghostly omen had been seen beforehand gave the tragedy a narrative, a sense of cause and effect. It placed the random cruelty of fate into a story that could be understood and retold, making the world feel less arbitrary and more meaningful. In a society that was largely illiterate, these stories were the primary vessels of history and memory. The great deeds of an ancestor, the founding of a town, the location of a forgotten battle, these events were preserved not in dusty books, but in the living, breathing tradition of storytelling. Of course, the facts often became embellished over time, layered with miraculous and supernatural details, but the core memory was preserved. Sharing these stories, especially the frightening ones, was also a powerful tool for community cohesion. A family or a village, huddled together around the fire on a long winter's night, listening with wide eyes as a storyteller spun a tale of a local haunting, was a community bonding together. They were united in their shared fears, their shared faith, and their shared understanding of how the world worked. Ghosts often served as supernatural guardians of social taboos. They would haunt the specific places where a great transgression had occurred, the crossroads where a suicide was buried, the room where a murder was committed, the ruins of a desecrated church. Their presence was a permanent, ghostly warning, a sign that the moral order of the universe had been violated in that spot, and that such actions have eternal consequences. The medieval concept of the revenant, which was often a physical, almost zombie-like creature that climbed from its grave to harass the living, reflected a visceral, tangible fear of the dead who had been wronged, or who had died with sins unconfessed. The church played a complex role in all this. It would often investigate reports of apparitions, seeking to validate those that served a theological purpose, like a soul from purgatory asking for prayers, while attempting to debunk or rebrand others as demonic, especially if they seemed to have roots in older pagan beliefs. The stories were a constant negotiation between official theology and popular folklore, a testament to a world where the dead were never truly gone and had a great deal to say to the living. These beliefs in a spirit world, however, were not uniform. Just as the languages and customs of medieval Europe were incredibly diverse, so too were its ghosts. The specific character of a region's folklore was shaped by its unique geography, its pre-Christian pagan history, and its local culture. As we take a gentle, calming tour of these variations, we see a spiritual landscape as rich and varied as the physical one. In the dense, dark forests and cold mountains of Germanic and Norse Europe, people feared the coming of the wild hunt. This was not a single ghost, but a terrifying spectral procession that raged across the winter sky on stormy nights. A pack of ghostly hounds would scream, horses would thunder, and at its head would be a spectral huntsman. Sometimes this leader was identified as a damned soul, a local nobleman who had loved hunting more than God. In other traditions, he was the ghost of a great hero, or even a lingering memory of a pagan god, like Odin. To witness the wild hunt was a terrible omen, a sign that war, plague, or the death of a great leader was imminent. It was the sound of chaos and doom, the sound of distant hunting horns on the wind, a fear born of the deep, wild woods. Travel west to the misty bogs and green hills of Ireland and Gaelic Scotland, and you will find a different kind of death omen. Here, people listened for the wail of the banshee. The bean, the woman of the fairy mound, was a female spirit whose mournful, heartbreaking cry, known as keening, foretold a death in one of the ancient families of the land. She was not an omen for everyone, only for certain bloodlines. Unlike the often silent White Lady, the banshee's power was in her voice. It was a high-pitched, sorrowful wail heard across the moors, a sound of pure grief that announced a coming loss. She was a spectral mourner, a supernatural extension of the family's own sorrow. In the cold lands of the north, in Scandinavia, the fear was not always of a spectral, ethereal ghost. It was of the Watcher. This was a being much closer to the medieval revenant, a corporeal undead creature of immense physical strength. The Draugr was the reanimated corpse of a Viking warrior or chieftain who would jealously and violently guard his own burial mound and the treasure buried within it. They were described as being swollen, blackened, and impossibly heavy, with a malevolent intelligence and a hatred for the living. They were a fear born of a warrior culture, a belief that a powerful man's will could be strong enough to keep his corpse moving long after death. Throughout much of Western Europe, especially in the Celtic lands, the world was believed to run parallel to another hidden realm, the world of the Fae, or the fairies. We must banish the modern image of tiny, winged sprites. The medieval Fae were powerful, unpredictable, and often dangerous supernatural beings. They had their own kings, queens, and courts, and lived in a world that sometimes intersected with our own, often through ancient mounds or strange clearings in the forest. They might steal away a human child and leave a changeling in its place. They might lure a traveler off a path and into their realm, where a single night might equal 100 years in the mortal world. You would not leave out offerings for them out of affection, but out of fear and a desire to appease them. Even the local churchyard had its own guardian. In England and Scandinavia, this was often the church grim, a spirit, usually in the form of a large black dog, that protected the sanctity of the consecrated ground. It was widely believed that the soul of the very first person buried in a new churchyard was duty-bound to become its eternal guardian. This belief transformed a personal tragedy into a communal benefit, giving a sacred purpose to the first to be laid to rest. Not all spirits were terrifying. In the cozy corners of the home, one might hope for the help of a brownie or a hob. These were household spirits, common in English and Scottish folklore. They were typically small, shaggy, and shy beings who would emerge at night, while the family was asleep, to perform chores like cleaning the kitchen or churning the butter. They asked for no payment, save for a small bowl of fresh milk or cream, left for them by the warmth of the hearthstone. But be warned, to offer them clothes, or to call them by name, was to offend them and drive them away forever. They were a charming belief that personified the quiet, unseen forces that make a house a home. These beliefs, and so many others, the mare that brought nightmares, the willow, the wisp that led travelers astray in the marsh, show how every aspect of the landscape and of daily life was populated with its own unique spirits, a rich tapestry woven from the threads of ancient paganism and new Christian theology. As the medieval period slowly gave way to the intellectual revolutions of the Renaissance and the Age of Reason, this world, saturated with spirits, began to change. The rise of science, the spread of literacy, and a new confidence in human reason began to push these beliefs into the shadows. They did not vanish overnight, but they began a long, slow retreat, moving from the realm of accepted fact into the realm of folklore, superstition, and eventually entertainment. Yet they never truly left us. The long echo of the medieval past still resonates today, shaping our modern ghost stories, our literature, and our deep, enduring fascination with the unknown. The first great revival of these medieval specters came with the Gothic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries. After a period of cool, rational enlightenment, writers and artists developed a deep obsession with the medieval past. They saw it as a time of sublime beauty, dark passion, and thrilling terror. Authors like Horace Walpole, in his landmark novel The Castle of Otranto, took the ruined castles and crumbling abbeys of the Middle Ages and repopulated them with ancient curses, rattling chains, and sorrowful ghosts. The castle ghost, which had become a piece of rural folklore, was brought back into the very center of popular culture. We can see the medieval ghost preserved perfectly in the work of William Shakespeare. The ghost of Hamlet's father is a textbook example. He is not a demon, nor a hallucination. He explicitly states that he is from purgatory, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and he has returned to demand justice for his own murder. He is a medieval ghost presented to a Renaissance audience, a perfect bridge between the old world of faith and a new world of psychological drama. The archetypes we explored in our stories continue to walk among us today. The White Lady, the aristocratic female ghost tied to a specific location, has become the woman in white of countless modern urban legends, a phantom hitchhiker seen on a lonely road. The desecrated ground of Glastonbury Abbey, a place spiritually stained by a great tragedy, is the direct ancestor of every haunted house story. From a small suburban home built on an ancient burial ground to the Overlook Hotel and the Black Knight, the vengeful, armored spirit can be seen in the countless tales of spirits who cannot rest until their deaths are avenged. Modern paranormal investigators, with their electronic equipment, are often still searching for these very same ancient archetypes. This profound influence is perhaps most obvious in the world of modern fantasy. Authors like J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were not just storytellers, they were brilliant medieval scholars. They drew deeply from the well of Norse sagas, Anglo-Saxon poetry, and medieval folklore. The elves and dwarves, the wraiths and the barrow-wights that populate Middle-earth are not modern inventions. They are scholarly, loving recreations of the beings that once haunted the imagination of medieval Europe, codified and given new life for a modern audience. Today, these stories are a major part of our tourism and entertainment industries. The owners of Hohenzollern Castle and the caretakers of Glastonbury Abbey proudly market their ghost stories to attract visitors from around the world. The tour guide's voice, echoing in the ruins of an ancient building, connects a modern tourist to that long, unbroken chain of belief. We buy books with castles on the cover and watch movies that flicker in a dark theater. And in doing so, we participate in this ancient tradition. The terrifying beliefs of our ancestors have been tamed. They have been made safe, cozy, and entertaining. We can experience the thrill of the supernatural while wrapped in a comfortable blanket, secure in the knowledge that it is, for us, just a story. And perhaps that is why we still need them. In a world that can feel overwhelmingly rational, a world explained by algorithms and physics, these stories provide a vital connection to a sense of mystery. They remind us that there may still be things that lie beyond our understanding. The idea that history itself is a form of haunting, that the past is never truly gone and continues to shape our present, is a powerful one. These tales, transmitted to us now through the quiet hum of a computer or a phone, connect us to the timeless, fundamental human experiences that our medieval ancestors knew so well. They connect us to love and to loss, to the terror of death and the hope for what comes after, to a sense of wonder at the great, beautiful, and sometimes frightening mystery of it all. And so we let the past settle. The great halls and windswept battlefields, the ruined abbeys and ancient libraries, they all fall quiet now. If you are still with me on this journey, this last chapter is for you. It is a final collection of whispers from the forgotten corners of history. There is no urgency here, no great drama. These are simply stories, told softly, designed to help the quiet of the past become the quiet of your own mind. Let these last few tales be a gentle, drifting current, carrying you peacefully towards the shores of sleep. Our first whisper comes from the mountains. We travel to the border of France and Spain, to the high, lonely passes of the Pyrenees. Here the air is thin and cold, and the wind howls through the narrow stone valleys, creating strange and mournful echoes. The moonlight shines down on jagged, silent peaks. It is a place that feels ancient, a place saturated with memory. And it is here, in a place called the Hohenzollern Pass, that a phantom army is said to still be marching. The story is rooted in a real historical event. In the year 778, the great king of the Franks, Charlemagne, was returning from a campaign in Spain. As his vast army snaked its way through the narrow mountain passes, his rear guard, laden with treasure, was ambushed and completely wiped out by local Basque forces. It was, in truth, a relatively minor military disaster in a long and successful reign, a footnote in the grand story of a great emperor. But history is not always what happened. It is what we remember. 3 centuries later, this small, bloody skirmish was transformed. It became the subject of one of the greatest epic poems of the Middle Ages, the Song of Roland. This poem, a chanson de geste, or song of heroic deeds, took the historical bones of the battle and clothed them in the flesh of myth and legend. The Basque ambushers were transformed into a vast Saracen army. The battle became a titanic struggle between Christianity and Islam, and the commander of the rearguard, a little-known nobleman named Roland, was reborn as the greatest knight in Christendom, a paragon of courage and heroic sacrifice. The poem tells a tragic tale. Roland, along with his wise friend Oliver and the fiercest of Charlemagne's warriors, is betrayed and surrounded. Vastly outnumbered, they fight with superhuman strength. Oliver begs Roland to blow his great war horn, the Oliphant, to call Charlemagne's main army back to save them. But Roland, in his heroic pride, refuses. He will not show weakness. He will not ask for help. He and his men will win glory on their own. Only when the battle is truly lost, when his men lie dead and dying all around him, and he himself is mortally wounded, does Roland finally raise the Oliphant to his lips. He blows a blast so powerful that his temples burst. Far away, Charlemagne hears the faint, mournful horn call echoing through the mountains. He turns his army around, but it is too late. By the time he returns, Roland and all his men are dead. They are martyrs who have sacrificed themselves for their king and their faith. This epic story became one of the most popular tales of the medieval world. It was sung by minstrels in castles and on battlefields, and for the countless pilgrims who walked the famous Camino de Santiago, the great pilgrimage route to the shrine of St. James in Spain. The Roncesvalles Pass was a key landmark. They would walk the very ground where Roland was said to have fallen, and as they walked, their own footsteps echoing on the lonely path, they would tell his story. It is from this potent mixture of historical fact, epic poetry, and the deep faith of the pilgrims that the legend was born. It is said that on the anniversary of the battle, if you stand in the pass at night, you can still hear them. You can hear the faint, distant sound of thousands of men marching, the clank of steel on stone, the jingle of a horse's harness, and sometimes, carried on the wind that howls through the rocks, you can hear the impossibly sad, distant call of a single horn. It is Roland blowing his Oliphant for all eternity. This is a ghost army, a story of a powerful, traumatic event, replaying itself over and over. Much like the phantom monks of Glastonbury, the soldiers of Charlemagne are not thought to be intelligent spirits. They are a memory imprinted upon the landscape itself. The high, lonely geography of the pass helps the legend endure. The wind here can play tricks on the ear, and the echoes can turn a simple sound into something mysterious and complex. For the isolated mountain communities who have lived here for centuries, preserving these tales in their oral tradition, the Phantom Army is as real as the mountains themselves. Charlemagne, a man who became a figure of legend, almost a saint, left an echo of his own glory and his own sorrow in this pass. And so the army marches on, a melancholy, mythic whisper in the cold mountain air. From an army of ghosts forever marching on the land, we now drift outwards to the vast, dark, and endless expanse of the sea. Let us move from the cold mountain air to the taste of salt spray on the lips. The medieval ocean was a place of profound terror and mystery. For most, it was a largely uncharted realm, the edge of the known world. Maps were filled with warnings. Here be dragons. The sea was seen as a place of chaos, a primeval force that could swallow ships and men without a trace. It was the home of krakens and sea serpents, and it was a place where the wrath of God could be felt in the awesome power of a sudden storm. It is in this environment of fear and isolation that the legends of the sea were born. Long before the famous tale of the Flying Dutchman took its definitive shape, the sailors of the North Sea and the Baltic told stories of other cursed ships, other phantom crews. These tales were the whispers of men who spent months or years on small, creaking wooden ships, a tiny, fragile bubble of humanity in the midst of an immense and hostile wilderness. The stories often began with a captain, a man of great skill, but also of great pride. He finds his ship caught in a terrible storm, the waves like mountains, the roar of the wind and the crack of lightning deafening. His crew begs him to turn back, to find a safe harbor, to pray for mercy. But the captain, in his arrogance, refuses. He makes a boast, a terrible blasphemy. He swears an oath that he will round the Cape, even if it takes him until Judgment Day. Or, in other versions, he makes a desperate pact with the devil, offering his soul in exchange for passage through the storm. His terrible wish is granted. He survives the storm, but he finds himself cursed. His punishment is to sail the seas forever, never again to make port, never again to feel the solid earth beneath his feet. His ship becomes a phantom, its sails torn and ragged, its timbers glowing with an eerie light. He and his spectral crew are doomed to an eternal, restless voyage. To see his ship is the worst of all possible omens. It is a sign of your own impending doom, a promise that you too will soon be joining the drowned. These tales were especially common among the sailors of the Hanseatic League, the great medieval trading network that dominated the northern seas. They were a practical people, but also deeply superstitious. Their lives were governed by countless rituals and beliefs designed to appease the unpredictable sea. They knew the strange tricks the ocean could play on the mind. They had all seen St. Elmo's fire, the strange glowing balls of plasma that can appear on a ship's mast during a thunderstorm. This ghostly light could be interpreted as a good omen, the saving presence of a saint. Or it could be seen as a warning, the touch of a ghostly hand. The psychological toll of these voyages was immense. The endless creaking of the ship's timbers, the feeling of profound isolation, the constant danger. It was a life that bred a need for stories to explain the unexplainable. A ghost ship legend was more than just a spooky tale. It was a cautionary one. It reinforced the importance of piety, of respecting the power of God and the sea. It was a tool for enforcing discipline, a warning to any sailor or captain who might be tempted by pride or blasphemy. It was a story that spoke to their deepest fear, not of drowning, but of being lost forever, unable to ever return home. And so the phantom ship sails on, a lonely lantern swinging in the fog, a lulling, mysterious whisper from the heart of the great ocean. From the vast, open terror of the sea, we now retreat to a place of quiet, stillness, and enclosure. Let us find ourselves in the hushed, reverent silence of a medieval library. The air here is cool and smells of old parchment, of leather bindings, and of dry, fragrant ink. It is a place of peace, a sanctuary of knowledge. But even here, in this calmest of places, a powerful belief held sway. A belief in curses, in the supernatural power of the written word to protect the treasures it held. We must remember that before the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, every single book was a precious, almost priceless object. Each one had to be copied by hand, by a scribe in a monastic workshop called a scriptorium. The process was painstakingly slow. It could take months, even years, of dedicated labor to produce a single volume. The materials themselves, finely prepared animal skin or vellum for the pages, ink made from ground minerals and oak galls, shimmering gold leaf for the illuminated letters, were incredibly expensive. A single book could be worth as much as a small farm. They were the treasures of a monastery or a university, and they had to be protected. One of the primary methods of protection was the book curse. On the first or last page of a manuscript, the scribe who had labored for so long to create it would often add a written warning to any potential thief. These were not gentle requests. They were terrifying threats, invoking the highest powers in the universe to punish the wicked. The curses would threaten a book thief with a host of horrifying fates. Listen to the words of one such curse, translated from the Latin. Let the words wash over you, not for their meaning, but for their slow, serious rhythm. For him that stealeth, or borroweth, and returneth not this book from its owner, let it change into a serpent in his hand, and rend him. Let him be struck with palsy, and all his members blasted. Let him languish in pain, crying aloud for mercy, and let there be no surcease to his agony, till he sinked to dissolution. Let bookworms gnaw his entrails in token of the worm that dieth not, and when at last he goeth to his final punishment, let the flames of hell consume him forever. To our modern ears, this sounds like elaborate, overwrought prose, but to the medieval mind it was a potent threat. In a world where most people were illiterate, the written word, especially the formal Latin of the Church, was seen as having an almost magical, binding power. A curse written in a holy book was not a mere string of words. It was a spiritual weapon, and the ultimate threat in many of these curses was excommunication. For a medieval Christian to be excommunicated, to be formally cut off from the Church, its sacraments, and the community of believers, was a fate literally worse than death. It was believed to guarantee your eternal damnation. No book, however valuable, was worth that price. This belief in the book's spiritual power was part of the scribe's world. These monks, who spent their lives in quiet contemplation and painstaking work, even had a name for the specific demon who plagued them. His name was Totivulus. He was a mischievous, minor demon whose job was to cause scribes to make errors a skipped line, a misspelled word. According to the legend, Totivulus would collect all of these mistakes in a large sack, and on Judgment Day he would present them as evidence against the poor scribe's soul. This belief, in its own charming way, shows the immense pressure the scribes were under to create a perfect copy, and their very human need to have someone to blame when they inevitably made a mistake. And so the books were protected. They were protected by their great value, by being chained to the shelves in libraries, and by the power of the curses written within them. The quiet, scratching sound of a quill on parchment was the sound of a sacred act, and the book it created was believed to have a protective power, a spirit of its own. It is a calm, fascinating whisper, a testament to a time when books were not just objects, but sacred souls. And now, our journey through these whispers of the past is coming to its final, quiet close. The stories have been told, the last echoes are fading. We have seen that all these legends, in their own way, are about the power of memory. They are about the deep and timeless human need to tell stories, to keep the past alive, to make sense of a mysterious world. The quiet you feel in an old place, in a ruin or a silent church, is the quiet of accumulated stories. It is the peace of being surrounded by the memory of countless lives that came before. The White Lady keeps her silent, sorrowful vigil. The Black Knight maintains his unending, watchful guard. The monks of Glastonbury offer their eternal, peaceful prayer. In the mountains, the phantom soldiers of Charlemagne continue their sorrowful march. On the sea, the cursed sailor continues his endless, lonely voyage. And in the library, the scribe rests, his quiet dedication bound forever in the pages he created. All of history is not just a collection of loud battles and the deeds of kings. It is the soft, gentle accumulation of these countless quiet lives and their whispered stories. And now it is time to let these stories go. Allow them to drift away like smoke from a candle or like fog lifting from the sea. Allow the mind to become as quiet as a deserted castle, as still as a forgotten battlefield, as silent as a monastic library at midnight. Feel the soft pillow under your head. Feel the gentle, comforting weight of a warm blanket. Listen for a moment to the slow, steady, rhythmic pattern of your own breathing, in and out. Let the darkness behind your closed eyes be a soft and welcoming curtain. The stories are now at rest. The halls of Hohenzollern are quiet. The fields of Pontefract are still. The last Amen has echoed through Glastonbury's arches. The past is at peace, and now so are you. Let the whispers of history become the silence of your dreams. Sleep well, and until next time,